Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Dustin Bucci. That's me. Today's episode is part 2 of my conversation with Doug Sandler. Now listen, if you didn't listen to part 1, that's totally cool, because the reason that we had 2 episodes, we broke this out, is basically we talked about 2 totally different topics. Part 1, if you did listen to it, you'll remember that the big focus of that conversation was around his book called Nice Guys Finish First. And we talked about the importance of being a nice person, helping people out, including your customers, being present, being focused, and making sure that you're not too worried about yourself and just looking around for ways to be helpful. And if you do those kinds of things, you change your mindset and get rid of the head trash, it's going to help you grow your sales in ways that you haven't imagined. Well, here in part 2, we transitioned over to his genius. Doug has been doing podcasting since 2015, and now he has his own company all around helping companies build and establish their own podcast. So his company, Turnkey Podcast Production, where he provides podcast production, editing, launch services. His podcast, Nice Guys Podcast, has over 1,000 episodes, over 800 interviews with people like Arianna Huffington, Gary Vee. We've mentioned Dan Harris, been another guest of his. John C. Maxwell is another name you might recognize. So this guy's been podcasting since 2015. He's done over 1,000 episodes. He's had over 3.5 million downloads of his episodes across 175 countries. So when it comes to podcasting, the dude knows what he's doing. And because of his expertise in podcasting, he helps companies build and launch their podcasts. And so if you're sitting there saying I'm not like one of those people that wants to launch a big podcast and make lots of money on a podcast, totally cool. That's only one way you can be thinking about podcasting. Most importantly, and in the conversation today, in part 2 with Doug, we talked about the importance of using podcasts as a way to influence and create community, not just make money. It doesn't have to be a place where you're selling advertisements or pushing product or anything like that. But if you're running your startup, you have established yourself as a leader in your market by stepping out from the rest of the market and saying, I am building this product. We're solving this problem in a way that nobody else has solved it. You have effectively decided, I am taking a leadership position, and your market deserves to hear from you. They need to hear your perspective. And among the other ways that you can establish that authority voice for yourself, a podcast is one of the lowest friction, easiest ways, and highest value ways to do just that. And so Doug and I talked about the virtues of podcasting, how you could be using it in your market, even if what you're selling is, let's just say enterprise software for the transportation industry. You might ask yourself, why would I want to who would want to listen to a podcast from somebody like us? Well, I guess I'll tell you who. Your prospects, your customers, people that are in the transportation industry. That's who. And so Doug and I talked a lot about the importance of really just focusing in, having a very specific market niche, and how that can actually be very helpful for you. Doug, in fact, in our conversation shared that he runs a podcast all about Ford Mustangs that were built between 1964 and 1966. He has a podcast just on that topic, and he has about 1,000 episodes that get downloaded every single week because he has this passionate set of listeners that love early release Ford Mustangs. And so we can do this, take that same idea and translate that to your business, your startup, even if you have 100 or 500 or, just a couple of people, in the hundreds of people listening to your episode. If they're your target market and the people that care about the problem that you solve, you're going to create that passion or listenership for yourself. And you're going to educate them. And most importantly, it's going to help you establish your leadership position with them and with your marketplace as you're going out there trying to sell your product and most importantly, make an impact in that market. So that's the gist of our conversation with Doug. If that doesn't sell you in terms of why you should listen about how to do a podcast and why you should do a podcast, I don't know what will. We definitely got into some really specific tactics, ways to think about how to get rolling. What should you do with your first 10 episodes? How should you get over that hump of going from idea to actual implementation? As well as Doug shared some resources that are available on his website that you can go and download. He's got a toolkit on his website, turnkeypodcast.com/toolkit, where you can download. And it's a playbook that you can use to start thinking about your podcast. And he even offered to he does free no-sale sessions with people just to consult with you about, if in fact podcasting does make sense for you, give you some ideas, brainstorm some ideas on what you could be doing with your podcast for your company and help you get on your way. So that's it. That's what's ahead in this episode in part 2 in my conversation with Doug Sandler. So without any further ado, let's head to my conversation, the second half of my conversation with Doug Sandler. So I have a whole set of questions that I had written down, and maybe this is a good time to transition into this because podcasting is your jam. It's one of the things that you've done you said you started doing podcasts in 2013, which is, like the stone ages of podcasting. I mean, right now it's sort of given that we have podcasts everywhere. There's millions of them and more of them getting created every day. But in 2013, like I remember I started listening to podcasts around 2012, 2013. And I would sit there and actually like listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast and he'd have these guests. I would get a notebook out and I would be like taking notes.
Right.
I'm like, this is like a free class. I mean, this is like the start of podcasts. It's such a new medium. And so you have a lot of obvious expertise, not just with your own podcast, but now helping other people. And, I've always been a proponent that as a founder of a company, you have this voice, right? You want to help this market. You have a perspective on the problem. You've got a certain leadership position that you just created for yourself just by virtue of starting this company and trying to lead a marketplace. And I've always felt like getting out there and having this authority voice in the marketplace is a huge opportunity for you to find those people that want to follow you. So whether it's a webinar series or LinkedIn Lives or in your case, a podcast, I think it's a huge opportunity for people. You don't need, a Tim Ferriss subscription base to be effective and be impactful. So maybe could I just ask you to maybe sell the idea to somebody that might be sitting there thinking about we're a enterprise software company that sells solutions to the transportation market. Is like, who wants to listen to a podcast about that? Why should I start a podcast? Why would it help me? Even if I know that it might somehow, or I've seen other people do it, try to help nudge somebody who might be thinking about this in such an esoteric vertical, tell them why they should consider it. What are the upsides? What are the downsides if they don't?
It's a great question. And I love how you actually define that niche so well in the transportation sector, whatever it was that you just went through. And I come back to this show that I have right behind me is a picture of a 65 Mustang. I have a convertible Mustang. That car actually is a picture of my car. If you're not watching on video, you'll have to get to Scott's video and see what it's all about. But I have a 65 Mustang. It's in the garage downstairs. And because I wanted to share a little bit more about my Mustang with the world, I created a show called Ford Mustang The Early Years. It's the only podcast that's dedicated to classic Mustangs from year 64 and a half to 66. So it's first gen. I mean, that is as micro niche as you can possibly get. What's interesting is 500 to 1,000 downloads per episode. Tell me that the people that are listening to that aren't finely tuned into the Mustang world, right? I mean, they are. That's exactly what they go to. They probably have gone to Apple at some point. They typed in Mustang Podcast. Oh my gosh, there's a Mustang podcast on a 64 and a half, 65, 66 Mustang. I want to listen to that show. Doesn't matter what your niche is. Actually, the tighter that your niche, the better. The riches are in the niches when it comes to podcasting. So what I would tell you is instead of having a general business show, like our Nice Guys on Business podcast, 1,100 episodes, just one slight correction. We started in 2015. I started my career reinvention in 2013, just in case anybody misunderstood.
Thank you.
Nice Guys on Business podcast is such a wide net. I mean, we have entrepreneurs in our audience. It's too big a net. We can't get our audience to take action. Very hard to get because it's too wide a net. But I put something of interest to somebody on the Ford Mustang podcast, and all of a sudden now it's like they'll do anything I tell them. And I'll get 20, 30 emails an episode. If I ask for something, I'll get that kind of response from that show. But for my tens of thousands, if not millions of listeners on the Nice Guys on Business podcast, I ask them to do something, they do nothing because it's too wide a net to throw. So I would highly encourage the people that know exactly what their market is and who there is. Even if you have, go to Google and type in, or go to Apple Podcasts and type in funeral director podcast. There's probably 10 of them. It's like, wow. Right, exactly. There are transportation industry podcasts. And if they're not, it gives you an opportunity to be the pioneer in that particular marketplace. Did you just type in funeral director podcast?
Yeah, sorry.
How many are there?
Industry podcast every funeral professional should listen to.
Yeah, I mean, how many
There's
are
even
there?
a top 6 list podcast for funeral directors.
I'm telling you, stuff like that. It's like, even if there hasn't been, especially if there hasn't been a podcast done in your marketplace, to your market, that's a great environment. You can use it as a communication tool with your clients. You can use it as an educational tool for your team. You can use it as a monetization tool if you want to try to figure out where the money comes from in podcasting. It comes from providing products and services to people in the community. It comes from joint venture partnering from people that come on the show on your guest list. It comes from inviting people onto your show that have a product or service need for what you offer, and you can turn your guests into clients. There's a handful of ways that you can make a mint in podcasting, and most people don't even think about them. When you say monetization in podcasting, everybody immediately goes to Well, I don't want to sell advertising or sponsorship. Hell, I don't want to either. But we still seem to bump into $20,000 to $30,000 a year of income from advertising and sponsorship because we have a system in place that doesn't allow me to sell advertising and sponsorship. People bump into my advertising and sponsorship requests and they buy. And it's only because I've been around a long time for now. But there are so many other ways that you can monetize your podcast. And you can even do it before your show even launches. So that's the kind of stuff that we teach people in the launch concept, the launch phase, and then the production phase of how to actually make an impact with your podcasting, whether you want to make money, build influence, or grow your community. All three of those are within everybody's reach.
Yeah, I like this idea that you said. What were the three phases? Concept.
So there's
launch,
three reasons
monetize.
people get into podcasting: build community, grow their influence, or to make money, or a combination of all three. But in the beginning, I always tell somebody, just pick a lane. I don't care which one you pick. Just pick one that you want to make an impact in, and then we'll work on that strategy right out of the gate.
Okay. That makes good sense. So let's just kind of run this storyline through a little bit. So let's take that example of enterprise software companies that sells to transportation. It's like the most esoteric kind of, and there's like thousands of those kinds of companies. We work with a company that is a international payments platform that works with regional banks. And those bank customers tend to be mid-sized manufacturers. Like that's their freaking niche right now. If that person or that team wanted to start a podcast, what would they do to, because the next question I think a lot of people ask, okay, you sold me, I should do a podcast, even if I get 100 listeners, doesn't matter. It's going to help me address my audience. It helps me, I can use that content as part of our sales funnel. I can use that content in marketing. I get it. Okay, I'm on board with the podcast, but like, what do I talk about? Like, how do I come up with these episode ideas? Because now I got to produce content. How long does it need to be? What do I talk about? How do I run this thing? How do we get them from, okay, I want to do the podcast to the first three steps?
So, it's funny. I had a coaching call today. There was 3 brand new podcasters on this coaching call today. And one of the questions that they were asking me was somewhere around chapter 11 or 12 in the process. And I said, can we just work on chapter 1? I need you to title your show. I need you to come up with a show description. I need you to come up with art. I need you to come up with an open and a close. I'm going to help you with music. There is literally 11 steps in the launch process, but they were so excited to do it. They just wanted to know what happened down the road. And I said, once we get through this, we'll get to that. But I can't have you focused on that until we work on this templated stuff. So many times people are like, how am I going to come up with content that's going to be relevant to my market? And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Isn't this something that you're passionate about? Don't you love this? What do you talk to your prospects about? What do you talk to your R&D people about? What do you talk to your investors about? What do your clients want to know more about? why is it that you started this company to begin with? All of those things are content that, believe it or not, people are hungry to hear about. And you don't have to go 27 layers deep. You can keep it pretty surface in the beginning, especially your first 50 episodes. You got a year. If you're doing a weekly podcast, you have an episode, you have a year's worth of content you have to work before you even start to worry about going deep. Just stay surface.
So surface level, 1 podcast a week for 50 weeks. What about length? People are like, our podcast, I chose an hour because I like to have long form conversations. I feel like 2 hours, probably way too much. I get some people who tell me like, I love your podcast, but like an hour is too long. So every once in a while, we'll throw in some short episodes that aren't interviews, but they're maybe a LinkedIn video I did that's 9 minutes just to give some other content. But again, to help people overcome this barrier of like getting started, is there an ideal or recommended, like for those first 50 episodes, what should they do? How should they think about it?
It depends on what your content is. So if I have a very technical show, if I'm an engineer and I have an engineering-based show, it's going to be pretty challenging for me to explain a concept and go in any level of even surface depth in less than 45 or 50 minutes on the show. However, if I have a business podcast and I'm just trying to get across the concept of using an automated scheduling tool, maybe I only need to spend 20 minutes on that before people have had enough. So it really just depends on the content. I love the other thing that you had said is that you led with what I like to hear I like to hear 60 minutes. So if you're a 60-minute guy and you like to share that kind of content, that would be really challenging for me to interview somebody for 60 minutes at a time. And I've done 1,100 episodes of the Nice Guys on Business. So for me, I'm feeling like 25, 30 minutes of interviewing is probably of value to my audience. More than that is overkill. on the other side of it, I've also went into the episode production. We used to do 5 episodes a week of the Nice Guys on Business, and we were doing that for years, 5 episodes a week, because we had so much content, so many great guests, and so much stuff we wanted to get out. We found from our community that was too much. And so we dropped back to 3 episodes a week, which is where we are now. And we'll soon go to 2 episodes a week, just because we don't need to work this hard anymore. It just isn't, we could probably have an extremely high value show, deliver great content in our community, and still make close to a 7-figure income with doing 1 episode a week. And that to me is when I will know that we have attained, that's like one of my goals. It's like, okay, reduce to 1 episode, get our income up. Let's see if we can hit 7 figures doing 1 episode a week. And so for me, that is the goal where I'm trying to shoot for. Right now, we're at 3 episodes a week and mid 6-figure income with revenue on our show. So for us, it's like, okay, we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but we will be there. And there's no doubt, because all I have to do is duplicate what I've already done and just fine tune the system even more. And when I start to see people that are customers of ours repeating what we have done, duplicating what we've done, and having the same success, I can easily say, it's not just me. If anybody can do it, that's what I want to teach people how to do in my process. It's not just, money doesn't have to be a 4-letter word. I love the idea of being able to make money, build influence, and grow my community all at the same time. But I lead with money. For me, that's what I want to get from my show, so that I can develop other partnerships and do other things that I like that are within get my love basket filled, which is really all I'm about, is just making sure that gets filled.
Yes, we are off and running in my conversation with Doug Sandler. We're talking about podcasting here. So let's talk about this podcast. First of all, thank you for being a listener. I really, really appreciate it. What I would also really appreciate is that if you would go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave a review, give us a vote, tell us how many stars it is. It's super, super simple to do on your phone. It's easy to do, and it really helps us hear from the listening audience, that's you, about how we're doing. If you want to leave a comment as well, give us some suggestions on guests or topics that you would love to hear us cover. That would be awesome. And most importantly, for us to make a bigger impact so we can reach even more people with this podcast, your reviews are one of the things that these search engines on these podcast platforms use as a way to recommend our podcast to other people just like you. If they see more reviews, they see higher ratings, then that tells Apple Podcasts, hey, this is a pretty good podcast. We should recommend this to other people that want to learn about startups and sales. So if you would, just leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast. It would really, really help us out, help us get the word out. And secondly, tell a friend or 10. If you're listening to this episode, maybe send a text to somebody, shoot an email over to them with a link to this episode and say, hey, you're listening to this podcast called The Startup Selling Show. It's really good. You should check it out. The best way for us to get the word out is viral. The reviews certainly help, but word of mouth is still the best way to grow a podcast listenership. So if you would help us out, do that. Help us to do that. That'd be great. This past month has been our biggest month ever in terms of number of subscribers, number of downloads. Those numbers keep going up and up and up every single month. And it's so appreciated to know that we are delivering content that people want to listen to, that they're consuming, that they're using every single day. And so if you can help us reach even more people, that would be awesome. All right, that's it for now. Let's head over back to my conversation, part 2 with Doug Sandler. Yeah, so I'm on the opposite end where I look at this podcast and I've had people that want to do promotions or partner and those sorts of things. And I'm just like, that for me is not important. What's more important for me is having, insightful guests, share new perspectives. And frankly, the money for us in this podcast isn't even in, okay, somebody hears an episode and then all of a sudden they come to the website and they want to join the coaching program. It's part of the longest tail nurture sequence that's possible. And I've had people over time, will hop on a call and then start talking to them. They're like, yeah, I've been listening to your podcast for the last 12 months. I really like this episode. So I'm like, oh, okay. I had a new client back in the spring and I said something about a workshop I had done in New Zealand a couple months ago. He's like, oh, I know all about that. Like the team and I, we know all about your trip to New Zealand. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool.
So they are a fan. You are a fan.
I guess so. But for me, the monetization is more about I like having this conversation with you because we talked about this when I was a guest on your show. It's like free knowledge, free coaching.
Yeah, free coaching.
I get to talk to fun people. I get to meet new people. I get to share this content out and get people to know, I don't know all the answers when it comes to sales. there's a lot of other people that have
if you were to get, before becoming a client of mine, if you were to be given the question, what would be your goal for the show? To grow influence, to build community, or to make money? What would be your priority of those three if you were to have that question posed?
Could you define community for me in your sense? How do you use it when you say build community?
Like-minded people that want to understand, believe, and get involved, whatever that you are involved in, because they feel close to you.
So it would be, for me, it would be influence then.
Okay.
I mean, the community part is important. I think that's useful. I don't have my crusade is helping startups grow grow out of startup mode and get them to ramp up and scale mode.
So then the follow-up would be, then what does influence mean to you? What do you derive from influence?
What do I get from influence?
Yeah.
Well, so the whole reason I started our company in the first place, was because I saw through personal practice, I've been in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and I saw lots of companies fail simply because they didn't learn how to sell their product. They built a product, it was product-led selling, and they thought, I would just build this magical enterprise software and people want to buy it. And as much as I would try to explain to them, look, you still got to sell. And even startups I was a part of, I was brought in initially as you're going to do business development, set up partnerships and set up relationships. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I did that. That was the role at Applia, my first startup. We were 2 months into that, and we realized holy shit, we got to sell this thing. Right? That's the only way you're going to get this thing to grow.
Right.
And so for me, it was this perception that sales is either hard, or sales is not something I want to do, or sales is not something I'm good at, so therefore I can't do it.
Right.
And it was just this perception that selling was this black box of some kind. And I just wanted to rip the lid off of it and say, no, selling is a process, just like engineering is a process, product development, capital raising, managing people. It's all a process. Sales is no different. And so that was the whole reason I started this company. And so for the podcast, it's an opportunity for me to speak to a lot of people that aren't we work with clients every day, and we get to work with them in our coaching calls and our Slack channel and mastermind groups. And that's awesome. But there are hundreds and thousands of other startups that if they're not clients, it doesn't mean I don't want to help them in some way.
Right.
So that's why I have people like you come on, or other guests, because I want to help them look at sales and say oh, I didn't think about it that way. There are some things I could do.
Yeah. So for you, it really is, it's your give back. It sounds like your podcast is your give back to your community. There's no, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to angle for business with this, unless again, I'm missing some of the definition of what, I'm looking at it and saying, I want to use podcasting simply because I'm looking to get business, number one. So whether it's for my community or my guests, that's number one. Secondly, I'd love the idea of becoming an influencer. And third, it's all about community for me. So where you may put influence first, I would put it probably second. I would put community third, and I want to try to figure out how to make money from this thing. And so once we started to figure that out, we put a specific strategy in place for each one of those things. There's a strategy for becoming an influencer. There's a strategy for becoming a community builder, and there's a strategy for making money from your show. And most people just put them all into the I'm a podcaster category, and then they get a year in or 6 months in, and they're like, holy shit, I haven't made any money from my podcast. And I said, well, was that your goal? They said, yeah. And I said, well, let me look at your guest list. And I look at their guest list, and they had 30 influencers because they thought VIP status of everybody that came on the show was their way to make money. And I'm like, okay, well, how are you going to make money from this? You have 26 episodes, 24 of them are influencers, 2 community builders, and you didn't even have a chance to make money from anybody because you weren't pitching anything. You were just hoping through mutual mystification that somebody from your community would understand. You don't even have a call to action on your show. Right. You don't have anything. How are you making money? Do you have a landing page? Do you have a lead magnet? Do you have anything at all? And oftentimes we kind of, I'm like, no, not kind of. Do you have a strategy? Do you have a lead magnet in place? Do you have a funnel in place? Do you have a working funnel? Do you have 3 working funnels to A/B test them all? Do you have a way to figure out? And if you don't have that stuff, then you're not actually doing this as a business. You're doing this as a hobby. And pardon my expression, I hope you don't have to edit this out, but can you stop fucking around and start podcasting now for a living? Because once you get that, then we'll figure out what to do next. But until you understand,
you make the commitment to it.
Right. Yeah. You want to have a business, but you want to do it as this little thing on the side. And you want to say to me, I have people that, again, I don't want to say this in an irritated way because it's like, this is just very typical. Like that software guy that said, God, my clients are so freaking stupid. And I don't want to say that about my clients at all, but I have clients that say to me, how many hours do I have to invest in podcasting? And I said, well, if every time you opened up that microphone, you make $10,000, how many hours do you want to open it up every week? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, if every time you open up the microphone and you do an episode, you can make 10 grand, how many times do you want to open it up a week? Well, 20. I'm like, okay, cool. Then would you not worry about how many hours you spend on podcasting? If you're going to treat it that way, can we not even get started yet? And I try to say that gently, but that's the question that to me is like, how much time investment am I going to have to make? I don't know. As much or as little as you want. What kind of results do you want? Crappy results? Don't invest any time. Good results? We got to invest some time in it. And when people get that, then they start to understand a little bit more of the power of podcasting, but they don't get it only because they don't believe it yet. And until they start to see the fruit of their labor, they're like, oh man, I didn't get it. Now that we can show people, here's the process that you have to go through. If you get into podcasting, you don't have a back-end system to handle all of your admin, to make it automated, to make it easy, don't even start. Don't even start. Mm-hmm. Just don't, because it's not going to be fun for you. You're going to hate it, and you're going to be working in a zone that you don't want to be working in all the time.
And is that assuming that this is like a full-time thing as opposed to a software company that says, look, we want to use the podcast to influence, or we want to use the podcast as a way to share our authority voice? Because I would argue that I'd rather get somebody pumping out some episodes, even if 25 people are listening to them, than say like, well, if I'm not going to do all the things that Doug just talked about, then maybe I shouldn't do it.
Totally agree. But here's what happens. If you get into it with, I'm just going to create some content and I'm just going to get, 10 episodes out, I want you to start properly in it. It doesn't mean you have to invest all your time. It's kind of like when I was doing the bar mitzvah world, I would make 10 times what my competition was making, but I was only spending 1 day a week doing it. I don't think that you have to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week podcasting in order to make it successful. You could spend 2 or 3 hours a week podcasting and still make easily a 6-figure income from it when you're looking at it just for money. If you want to build community and influence, it's just a part of now your marketing tools. It's a content creator that you could create a piece of content, put it out there into the Apple sphere, and not recycle, reuse, regenerate that content, and you'll have a piece of content that's out there that's great. But wouldn't it be better to take that, slice it up 10 different ways and post it on every social media channel that you have, and start to get some marketing behind that piece of content to drive people to your podcast, so that people just don't have to go to your website and look around. They're now getting to know you as the host. When people get to know you, they want to hang out with you. Know, like, and trust factor starts to kick in, and now you start to develop relationships with people. They start to take one step closer to you. They raise their hand. They want to be part of your beta. Yeah, it's not an overnight thing, but at the same time, it's also not something you have to spend 50 hours a week doing. Just use it as one thing in many that you use as a tool in your business. And when you start to realize that this tool is highly valuable to get your message out, if you were to poll Tim Ferriss right now and you were to say, Tim, is your podcast a highly effective marketing tool for you? What would he say?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know how. I would say yes, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, okay, let's do it a different way. When you say, hey, Joe Rogan, is podcasting an effective tool for you in your business? What would that be?
Well, yeah, considering how much money he's getting paid to podcast right now.
Okay, and if that was his goal, to make money, then he's accomplished that goal. Right. So what I would say to people is, don't expect Joe Rogan results overnight, but you can't get Joe Rogan results if you treat this as let me just see if this works. That's not what works. You've got to, I'm not saying you have to go all in, as in spend all of your time and but you have to do what is required. That means you have to launch your show properly. That means you have to market your show properly. That means you have to create a professional production. I could just as easily pick up my phone and create a podcast episode, but I'd much rather use a microphone so at least I sound better, because I can't tell you how many people arrive at podcasting and they're like, yeah, I got a free web host. I got a free host to do my podcast, so I don't have to pay any money for that. And I'm doing it on my phone. And I'm like, and you do expect results from that? And
now you make me feel bad, because I'm recording this through Zoom and I'm using my Bose headset.
Hey, look, different strokes for different folks. Your goal is you don't necessarily have a goal of having a professional production with a microphone and a production company behind you. And if you're getting the results that you want, then you're in a really good spot. If people come to me and they say, here's what I'm looking for, and this is what I'm trying to get, the first area that I'm going to start is, well, we've got to make sure that we launch the show properly, you sound good, and that you understand what you're going to do with the content. It's not just putting content out to the world. That's just not going to work. And
yeah, no, I totally get it. Yeah. And so like thinking about this show personally, if we're sort of analyzing the way I think about it, for me, it's a really low time cost investment in that we've developed systems behind me so that almost none of the work for the podcast production is me, right? I literally show up, do the interview, and I'm out.
And it's done.
Jocelyn handles everything before. She then takes everything after, hands it to our production person who takes it, edits it, puts it up on Libsyn, gets it syndicated out. Then Jocelyn does all of the marketing for it. So for me, I spend like an hour or two a week. I spend time obviously preparing, reading about you and the book and, putting together questions, show up to the show and record, and then I'm out. So for me, I think of it as like a marginal cost, marginal benefit that yes, I could invest more time and I'd probably get more benefit. But for now, relative to the other things that I'm working on, working with clients, working on other projects, this isn't the top priority. I'm getting out of it what I expect given the input.
Yeah, if you're getting the goal, if you are achieving the goals that you have set, or if you haven't achieved any goals, then I would just encourage you, hey, put a line in the sand and say, this is what I hope to accomplish. And if you're not accomplishing that, then you figure out what to do in order to do that. I would assume that you're being a salesperson, you are probably fairly goal oriented. So if you have a goal, are you reaching it? And it sounds like you are, because it sounds like you're happy. And if you don't have a goal, would it make sense to set a goal so that you could at least draw a line in the sand and say, am I achieving it, so that I can look back a year from now and say, okay, I've just done 52 episodes. Did this make sense for my business, or did this just make me feel better? And if that is a win for you, then you're winning. Then that's cool. For me, it was all about, I'm reinventing my career. I've got to figure out how to duplicate or replace this income from this DJ business that I'm getting out of. How do I duplicate that? And man, we struggled for almost 2 years. We had no idea that community influence and money were even as a part of it. We just thought, we have a podcast. This is cool. And we had no plan. We were just like a rudderless ship. And that's what was the challenge. That's the challenge for most people. Most people get into this and they quit after, literally 12 episodes. There's even a term for it. It's pod fade. The next time people quit is at the 1 year mark, because they look back after the year, 50 some odd episodes, and they say, what did I accomplish? Nothing, or something, but not enough. And they quit because they don't see the results. And that's the shame, because they've had 52 weeks or 50 episodes or something like that to establish something, and they don't have a strategy in place because no one has taught them the need to have a strategy, which is probably very similar to what most people are in the startup world. You said it, oh my gosh, we got to sell something. It's not just about the product. We've got to sell it to somebody.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what this is about.
Well, look, man, you may have loosened a screw for me, man. I'm going to have to go think about this podcast a little bit more and think about if I need to up my game a little bit, which I really appreciate on a personal level. Like I said, look, see, I get free coaching just by having you as a guest.
Yeah.
And I think more importantly, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the other side of it, though, is if it achieves the goals that you anticipated or expect, I often encourage people, don't do anything. If what you're getting from podcasting is exactly what you wanted to get, when you were about to launch the show and you said, I'm going to put this out there to the world, what did you see? What was like a part of your vision? And if you can answer that and you can look back and say, I've achieved that after this amount of time, like, I don't know, how many episodes of your show do you have out right now?
Over 100.
That's substantial. That's enough to know if you are happy in this environment. It sounds like you're like a pretty happy guy.
Parts of the week.
I mean, that's cool. So if that is getting that cup filled for you, and that was the cup that you intended to get filled in the beginning, or if that's the hidden gift that you're getting from podcasting, like the hidden gift that I got from podcasting is after 1,100 episodes, 850 plus have been interviews. Most of my business comes from not my community, but from those partnerships that I've developed over those 850 interviews. And that, for me, that was so hidden. I had no idea that was even a part of podcasting. So looking back, it's like, hey, if you get this is the best part of my week cup filled, and I'm making a lot of relationships, I'm building a lot of relationships. If that cup is the one that you wanted to have filled, the other stuff for me to raise your awareness, you got to be passionate about the awareness raising, because the next thing is, it's like, oh no, now I've got to get to work. I don't want you to have to get to work doing this. I don't want this to ever feel like work. If this is joy, then it's absolutely, I love doing what I do, probably for the same reasons that you do. I get to open up a mic, talk to interesting people, develop some great relationships, make some money in the process, and everybody's happy and wake up every morning like, yeah, I get to do this, rather than, oh my gosh, I got to do this.
That's a great point. Like, I do a lot of ultra running, long distance races, and I follow professional ultra runners. There are professional ultra runners, not a lot of them, but there are enough. And I've read stories where, people have opened up on their blog and said, look, I was an amateur. I used to go do a couple races. I happened to be really fast. I got a sponsor. Then all of a sudden I still had to work, but then I won a race and then I got another sponsor. Then I quit my job and I became a professional runner, and now I'm miserable. Now like running used to bring me joy. Yeah. It used to be like this thing I could get out on the trail and get away from work and just enjoy nature. And now it's like, I got to do this event and I got to make sure I do my training. And if I get hurt, it's really stressful. Whereas before I would get hurt and go, okay, well, this is cool. And I can take a couple months break and spend more time with my kids. And that's a really good piece of advice. Take out of it what you want and don't push if you don't need to.
Right. Oh, agreed. Agreed.
Cool, man. Well, dude, like I said at the start of the show, I was a little disappointed that we've already gone more than an hour, and I know you need to run. So what I'm going to do is say thank you, most of all, for hopping on the show. I'm so glad that you had me on your show a few months back. It was one of the things that I really enjoyed. So I'm glad that because of that, we got to know each other, to your point, and now you're here on this show. For people that are, we talked a lot about podcasting, obviously, especially the second part of the conversation, and that is your jam. If somebody is just like that company I just talked about, that enterprise sales for transportation industry kind of person, and they just want to learn a little bit more about what it would take to get something rolling, where could they go to get some help from you or resources? What's the best place for people to get in touch?
I put together a really easy, no pressure approach to getting at least some information. It's at my website. It's just turnkeypodcast.com/toolkit. And if anybody goes there, they'll get a downloadable document, which will be how to start, grow, and profit from podcasting. There's also access, if you choose to take it, to a real short no-sell meeting where I can just get to know you, figure out if this makes sense for you. I'll probably be the first person to tell you if I don't think it's a good space for you based upon the information I'm getting. I'll just say, hey, I don't think this is a good thing for you. Or I might say, hey, this is a good thing for you, but there's not any badgering beyond that. I don't need to badger people that want to do this, do it. So turnkeypodcast.com/toolkit. That's probably a good place to start.
Okay, that's great. And I also know that you're on LinkedIn and you've got your own podcast that we talked about a couple of times. So people should definitely check that out. You've had some wonderful guests on the show. I saw recently it was John Maxwell was one of your more recent guests. Yeah.
John's been on the show a couple of times. I'm hoping to get him again. Jeffrey Gittimer has been on the show recently, also a real big guy in the world of sales that I met through a common connection. And just some really, really cool people. I've enjoyed interviewing.
Ariana Huffington.
Yeah. I mean, those are all been great, but I'll tell you, the best guys are guys like you and me, Scott, because they're the ones that are the most relatable to the world at large. When Jeffrey Gittimer or John C. Maxwell says, this is what I did and this is how I did it, it's great to listen to the story, but then you think, is he actually remember what reality is when it comes to, I'm not saying John doesn't, I'm sure he does. He's a great guy.
Sure.
But he has been successful for decades. I like the guy that's just been, hey, I've just hit success a couple of years ago and I'm happy to share my story. That's the guy that I want to have on my show because my audience can relate to them so much more.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. It's been a hoot having you here on the show. We'll have to do it again soon. Definitely would recommend for people to go check out that toolkit. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. And dude, let's do this again soon. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Doug.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
All right, man. See ya.